So I would like to address a phenomena that I have noticed for years now, and that is that people do not really heed to any sort of warning until the monster that they're being warned about has fully exposed itself. And the problem with this is that once the monster has fully exposed itself, by that point, it's too late. So what do I mean by this? Let me just further explain. Let me further explain my analogy. I did a live stream this Friday in which I talked about the revival of German power. And when you are talking about the revival of German power, uh, you can't help but also talk about the Third Reich because, well, Germany has a history, a history that we have all heard about. At least I hope that we have all heard about, and that is World War I and World War II. Germany lost World War I. Germany revived itself, and then there was World War II. So, if Germany is going to revive itself again, well, we should all be very worried about this. And I talked about, the revival of German power, and I showed statements from certain German thinkers, specifically Muriel Asseberg, who is considered to be a top Middle East analyst in Germany, and she is considered to be, a prestigious thinker within the think tank world in Germany, specifically on the subject of the Middle East and bringing back. Not bringing back, but having Germany make a strong position in foreign policy. And I talked about how Asseberg has stated that Germany needs to be a major player in the Middle East, and how Germany should also expand its law enforcement agencies into different countries to stop war criminals. And I pointed out how Asseberg believes that Israel is responsible for war crimes, and that Israel is basically this tyrannical occupying power over the Palestinian people, and how Germany needs to enforce international law in the Palestinian territories against Israel. So and the question that I asked is, how would Germany be able to enforce international law without Germany having a strong military force? Because you can't enforce anything without the potential for force. You can't enforce anything without force. So how do you force another country to do something without at least the potential for violence? And Asseberg is definitely a proponent for Germany being a strong military power, and there is a very, very there's a huge trend that's been going on in Germany for a number of years now that wants Germany to become a superpower, that wants Germany to become a very, very strong international force. And I talked about all of these things, and I talked about how there's a lot of talk in the German think tank world about bringing Germany into a position where it does have a strong military and where it can execute its military power in conflict zones, especially the Middle East. Well, what's the part of the Middle East that everybody focuses on? It's Israel. So if Germany is going to impose its will on the Middle East or in the Middle East, what's the one country that's going to be a primary focus? Or the primary focus? It's going to be Israel. And which country came the closest to actually exterminating the Jews? It was Germany. It wasn't an Islamic country. It was Germany. So if Germany is going to revive its power and expand its policy into the Middle East, well, we should at least be worried. And that was my point. And some people take issue with my opinion on this matter. And some people will say things like, during my last live stream, somebody disagreed with me on my opinion on Germany and said, Theodore, we're living in 2023, not 1923. And this is the problem with people. The biggest problem with people when it comes to this sort of issue is that they never listen to a warning about a problem until the problem is right in their face. Until the problem is very obvious. It's kind of like cancer. You know, when you have a cancer that is in its smallest stage, people don't really notice it. But once the tumor is very obvious, once the symptoms are very, very obvious, then in many cases, it's too late. You know, at that point, it's too late. It's the same thing with warning about the coming of tyrannies. If somebody tells you about a coming tyranny, if someone tells you about a coming evil empire or an extremely evil force, an evil regime, and someone is warning people about this evil regime and the coming of this evil regime, people tend not to listen, especially when the regime is Northern or Western European. Now, if I were to say, everyone, let's be concerned about the coming caliphate, well, a lot of people would agree with me, right? Because at this point, people generally can agree that there is a problem with Islamic fundamentalism, although there has been a very strong trend that sympathizes with the Palestinian terrorist cause. But generally speaking, it's not that difficult to get a lot of people to tell you that there is a problem with Islamism. Why is this? The reason for this is very simple. It's because the monster of Islamic fundamentalism has shown its face already. It has shown its face time and time again. Now, before 9/11, if you were trying to tell people about this danger before 9/11, most wouldn't even care about what you were trying to tell them. I know this for a fact because back in the 1990s, my dad was trying to warn people about the dangers of Islamic fundamentalism, and most people didn't care. Most people didn't care, and I'm not saying that my dad was speaking in major events or anything like that. My father was just speaking to people who were in his immediate vicinity, you know, who were in his social circles, people at church. My dad would tell people at church that there is a problem with Islamic fundamentalism, and my dad would tell people that that in the future, Islamic terrorism would be a very, very serious problem, and almost nobody cared about what my dad had to say. Almost nobody cared about what my dad was trying to warn them about until 9/11. Once 9/11 happened, the phone in my house was flaring up like a damn Christmas tree. It was ringing and ringing and ringing and wouldn't stop. And the calls were coming from people in the media, but they were also coming from people that we knew in our own social circle, people from church. Hey, I remember you were telling people about Islam. Tell us more. Now we're interested to know more about this problem. Why? Why are people this way? People tend to ignore a problem until it is right in their face and until it is completely exposed. People saw ISIS. People saw somebody getting burned alive in a cage. People saw people getting drowned. People saw ISIS hanging people on meat hooks. And it was at that point that all of a sudden, so many people in the world opened up their eyes to this evil. Oh my God, people being hung from meat hooks. But if they were around in the 1990s and they were hearing my father, they would not have cared. So they only care when the problem is right on their face. That's when people generally care about a problem. After World War I, if you were to tell people about the dangers of Germany, the dangers of a Reich, most people would not have listened to you. after World War I, because they would tell you, well, Germany was defeated, they're not going to commit the same mistake again, and World War I is supposed to be the war to end all wars, and you're crazy. They would call you crazy. A great example of this is Pierre van Passen. Pierre van Passen was a Dutch journalist who interviewed Hitler before Hitler took power. And during the interview, Hitler screamed at Pierre van Passen, telling him, "You as a Dutchman are sympathetic to the Jews. How could you, as a Germanian, have any sort of sympathy for the Jews?" And Passen saw the hatred in Hitler's eyes. He saw the bloodlust in Hitler's eyes. And Passen went to America. I believe he went to New York, and he went to a major synagogue in New York. And he told the people in the congregation that Hitler is going to take power, and I interviewed Adolf Hitler, and I saw in his eyes the hatred. And I can tell you right now that he is going to do a genocide on the Jews. And there was a wealthy Jewish man who disagreed with them and who demanded that, or I shouldn't say demand. Demand sounds a little bit forceful. He requested to have a conversation, a private conversation with Pierre van Passen. And in the conversation, this wealthy Jewish man told Pierre van Passen that I completely disagree with what you said in your speech. Civilization will always be civilization. Germany will always be Germany. In other words, Germany is this center for European civilization, and Germany would never do what you're telling people that Germany is going to do. And this is how people think. This is how a lot of people think. They see Western civilization, they see Europe, they don't see genocide. Even though these things have happened in the past, and you can read about it in books, and it's right there in the open, in the records, they don't foresee genocide being done by a major European power in the future. They can see Islamic genocide, or they can see Islamic despotism, because we've seen the beheadings, we've seen the ISIS killing videos, we saw 9/11. So they can foresee that, but they can't see it in Europe because they haven't seen it in their own time. They've only read about it in books. They have only heard about it from the mouths of elderly people. They have heard about it from the History Channel, and that's it. And so when your understanding about something is only limited to the past, or it's only limited to some old people from the past telling you about it, and it's not in front of you, you don't really care. You don't really care. And a lot of times, people will support their destroyers. People will support the very entities that will later on wipe them out, thinking that these entities will support them, will help them in some way. A great example of this is Mussolini. Do you know that a lot of Jewish people in Italy voted for Mussolini? There was huge Jewish support for Mussolini in Italy amongst the Jewish community, the Italian Jewish community. This is something that's not very much so talked about, but it is an historical reality. Some of Mussolini's biggest supporters were the people in the Jewish community in Italy. And who turned Italy over to the Nazis? It was Mussolini. Mussolini turned Italy over to the Nazis. And what happened to all of the Jewish people who voted for Mussolini? They were butchered. A lot of them were butchered. A lot of them didn't make it. A lot of them were massacred by the Germans. Why? Because Mussolini turned Italy over to the Germans. So the very person that the Jews thought was great ended up turning them over to their deaths, turning them over to concentration camps. People, a lot of the time, will vote for those who will destroy them. And you can see this sort of thing in Germany. Right now, one of the biggest parties in Germany is an ultranationalist, far-right party, a German nationalist party called the Alternative for Deutschland Party, the AfD. And they are German Jews who support the AfD. Why? Because in their minds, the AfD is fighting against Islamic immigration from Islamic countries. They're fighting against the acceptance of Muslim refugees into Germany. And a lot of Islamic refugees, a lot of Muslim immigrants are anti-Semitic, or they hate the Jews. I mean, I don't like the term anti-Semitic because a lot of these Muslims are Semitic themselves. I mean, I'm Semitic myself, right? A lot of people, I mean, people from the Middle East are a Semitic people, so I'll just say they hate Jews. A lot of these Islamic refugees or Muslim immigrants hate the Jews. And so a lot of the Jewish people in Germany are scared of immigration from the Islamic world, so they vote for AfD. It really is that simple. Now, are some of these Jews racist people? Probably, yeah. I mean, Jews aren't exempt from having racist in their own ranks. They are Jews who are very racist. This is a fact. It's nothing far-fetched to say. But this is the reason, this is at least the reason why they say they vote for the AfD. But it's very strange to me that Jews would vote for the AfD because of the fact that they are leaders in the AfD who are Nazis. I mean, it's pretty damn weird that Jews would vote for the AfD because the AfD is full of Nazis. For example, and there's a lot of sympathy for the AfD online. Even there are Americans on the internet who sympathize with the AfD, which is really not surprising at all because there's a lot of weirdos in the United States. But for example, one of probably the most famous member of the AfD is Björn Höcke. Björn Höcke is a Nazi, and he is the most famous leader of the Alternative for Deutschland party. He is a Nazi. He hasn't tried very hard to make that a secret. He bashes Holocaust memorials. He says that Germany is the only country that has these memorials of shame, and he referred to a Holocaust memorial as a memorial of shame, and he said we need to have a complete shift away from this way of thinking that focuses on the Holocaust. Anytime somebody says things like, why are we focusing so much on the Holocaust, especially if they're from Germany, that's always a red flag. Like, they're tired of hearing about the Holocaust. For one thing, the Holocaust isn't the only thing that's talked about, right? Obviously. I mean, there's a bunch of things that people are talking about. The Holocaust isn't the only thing. So the fact that that bothers you, that Germany's biggest crime is talked about a lot, tells me a lot about you. It's like when Japanese nationalists say, we're tired of hearing about Nanking, and it's like, oh, okay, well, what party do you belong to? Oh, you belong to some nationalist party. Oh, yeah, you're a hardcore Japanese nationalist. Okay, that doesn't surprise me. Oh, you sympathize with the kamikazes. That doesn't surprise me. It's the same thing with any other sort of hardcore nationalist. If a Turkish person comes to you and says, I'm sick and tired of hearing about the Armenian genocide, that is a red flag. That means that Turkish person is a racist. And there's a lot of racism in Turkey. It's one of the most racist countries in the world. So when I see this Björn Höcke guy talking about, how we need to have a shift away from talking about the Holocaust, he bashes Holocaust memorials, or when he talks about like the different breeding rituals between whites and blacks and how there's different, not rituals, the different genetic apparatuses between whites and blacks or something like that. When he gets into eugenics, I mean, all these things are red flags. And anytime someone says something like, let's stop talking about the Holocaust, or let's not talk so much about the Holocaust, or, we have to be proud of our race, or when somebody says something like, when someone says something like, the AfD is a moderate party, these are all red flags, because the AfD is not a moderate party. It's just not. It is full of Nazis. It is full of people who just don't want to talk about the Holocaust. It's a Nazi party. And people will argue, and I saw this today, I wanted to bring this up. I saw that about a month ago, DW did a documentary about the AfD. And they show in the documentary that it's a Nazi party. It's an ultra-nationalist party. It tries to hide this in a deceptive way, but people with brains, people with good enough intuition and some knowledge of history can see that the AFD is a Nazi party. It's a huge problem, especially given the fact that it is growing in popularity. In 2017, for example, it was the third largest party in Germany. So the AFD is part of the mainstream. And DW did a documentary about a month ago on the AFD, showing that it is an ultranationalist far-right party. And I was looking at the comments. Almost every single comment was sympathetic to the AFD. And almost every single comment was condemning DW for doing the documentary. Terrible journalism, terrible reporting. The mainstream media is garbage. Blah 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 blah. And I wasn't really surprised about this because I've noticed this trend since 2016. I've noticed this trend, and I know it goes further back than that, but that's when I really began to notice this problem. I noticed it in 2015 during the migrant crisis. Seeing how people were becoming more and more fanatical, more and more radical. And one of the arguments that I've heard in defense of the AFD is that the reason why the AFD is growing is because the German people have nowhere else to go to. Because you have the Christian Democrats who support mass migration, and the other parties support mass migration, so they have nowhere else to go to. It's not that these Germans are racist or that they're Nazis, it's because they have nowhere else to go to. If there was a conservative party that was against immigration but wasn't Nazi, a lot of people would go to that party. And I was doing some reading on the AFD today, and I found out some more things about Frauke Petry. Frauke Petry used to be one of the big faces representing the AFD. Frauke Petry, she was a high-ranking leader of the AFD, and in April of 2017, she was basically kicked out of the party. Why was she driven out from the party? Because she was trying to make the AFD into a moderately conservative party. The AFD started in 2013, and it was founded by a guy, I believe his name was Bernd Lucke. And Lucke started the AFD as a response against the EU policy of giving money to the poorer Southern European countries. So basically, the original message of the AFD was, we Germans are fiscally and financially responsible people. These Southern Europeans, these Greeks, these Spaniards are not. So we shouldn't be helping them. That was the initial message of the AFD. And it went from basically being mad about giving money to Southern European countries to being mad against immigrants or mad at refugees. And Lucke did not want his party to be this anti-immigration party, but that's what it became. And eventually Lucke resigned from the party. He was probably kicked out, but they say that he resigned. People like Björn Höcke took over the party, and Frauke Petry was, she became a leading figure for the party. Frauke Petry, though, was not so much on going gung-ho on the Nazi stuff. And so she was like, why are you guys Sieg Heiling so much? And she was trying to reform the AFD into going into being from visually speaking, a borderline Nazi party to becoming a moderately conservative party that was just anti-immigration. So she was trying to reform the party, and the people in the AFD were like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you doing this? We don't want to become a moderately conservative party. We want to be this nationalist party. So she resigned from the AFD, and then she started her own party called the Blue Party. She started her own party, and the purpose of, or the mission of her party was to have a moderately conservative party that was against the the immigration policy of that time. Well, do you know what happened to the Blue Party? In 2019, it was founded in 2017. In 2019, it got dismantled. The people who founded the Blue Party dismantled the Blue Party. Why? Because it wasn't popular enough. And in one election, in one regional election, they only got like 857 votes. So they weren't getting anywhere. So if the reason why people are going to the AFD is because they have nowhere else to go, so they have nowhere else to go but this far-right party, and if there was a moderately conservative party that was against mass migration, they would join that party. If that was true, then why didn't people join the Blue Party in the droves? Why? I mean, Frauke Petry was a very known politician at that point. She already had a voice. She already had fame. Why weren't people leaving the AFD by the droves and going into the Blue Party? They weren't. The Blue Party was so unpopular that it disappeared. So this whole idea of, well, the reason why people are joining the AFD is because they have nowhere else to go. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense. The reason why people are joining the AFD isn't just because they're against mass migration. If that was the case, they would have joined the Blue Party, but they didn't. The reason why a lot of people are joining the AFD is because they're Nazis. And for some reason, a lot of people refuse to come to grips with the fact that there are a lot of people out there who are just racist. I mean, there are a lot of racist people out there. There are a lot of Nazis out there. Germany lost World War II. The Nazis who were in the Third Reich, they had children. What do you think they taught their children? You think they taught their children, let's love everybody? I mean, I'm sure a lot of them, and I know a lot of Germans realized that it was all garbage, and they told their children not to follow that sort of stuff. But I think it's pretty reasonable to say that there were a lot of people who didn't, that there were a lot of people who passed down their ideology to their children, and those people had children. That stuff got passed down. It didn't go anywhere. And if you think, well, no, that's just impossible, that's just not true, I think you're a fool. I think you're a fool if you cannot see that ideologies get passed down. I think you're a fool if you really believe that all of the Germans who loved Adolf Hitler and who loved Nazism just magically changed and didn't pass down, or that none of them passed down their ideology to their children. And that ideology got passed down to their children. You know, it's not just immigration. Just like the hatred towards Jews that the Palestinians have is not just about the occupation. You know, people have this idea, well, they hate Jews or they hate Israeli Jews because of the occupation. And the argument that, you know, people are joining the AFD because they have nowhere else to go to, people make the same sort of argument for Hamas. They say, oh, the reason why Palestinians are voted for Hamas is because they had nowhere else to go. I mean, Fatah, they're too moderate. They're just sellouts, so people have to go to Hamas. And that's the reason why a lot of Gazans support Hamas, because they have nowhere else to go to. They have no one else to go to. They have no one else to go to represent them. People make the same sort of arguments. And they'll say it's because of the occupation. It's not just because of the occupation. It's also because of an ideology. It's about Islamic fundamentalism. That's the main reason why they voted for Hamas, because of Islamic fundamentalism. The same reason why a lot of people in Germany are voting for AFD. It's because a lot of people, I think, are going back to the past and they're saying maybe that Hitler guy was right. And you have people, AFD people who are saying, well, you know, we're pro-Israel. And I think that they're just using this. I don't think these people are even against Islam, for the most part. I think these people are just using the Islamic problem to foment racism. It's the refugees. Because a lot of these far-right nationalists in Germany, while they say that they're against Islamic immigration and all that stuff, that's more of just the reason why I think they're against Islamic immigration is because they're just racist. I don't think they're really against Islam itself. they just see Middle Eastern people, and they don't like Middle Eastern people, or that Middle Eastern people, a lot of them will bring crime, or some of them will bring crime, and I think they use those crimes also as a way to foment, racial hatred, because I don't think they have a problem, or at least I don't think a lot of them have a problem with Hamas killing Jews. In fact, I was looking a little bit into this. There's a big right-wing magazine in Germany. It's either in Austria or Germany. It's called Compact. And if you look up Compact, the magazine, and look up what the magazine has to say about the whole war between Hamas and Israel, a lot of them are saying, this is not our war. Germany should not be on the side of Israel. Germany should not be saying, that we are totally on Israel's side. Why are they saying this? It's because, well, in their minds, it's nice that Hamas has killed Jews. They just don't want Palestinians in Germany. In other words, go kill the Jews in Israel, but we don't want you here in Germany. So it's not really about hating Islam. It's just that they don't want non-whites in their country. In fact, the AfD regional youth branch, called Junge Alternative, in the state of Baden-Württemberg, criticized Germany's unwavering support for Israel. And this regional youth branch for the AfD asserted that it would stand first and foremost with Germany. And one of the head ideologues for the far right in Germany and Austria, Götz Kubitschek, recently did an interview, and he was asked about the October the 7th massacre. And Götz Kubitschek stated that he didn't want to express his opinion on the massacre because Jews are behind the mass migration of refugees into Germany. This is what he said. And there is this belief in the German and Austrian, really the European far right, that the Jews are behind the mass migration of refugees into Europe. For example, one of the main intellectuals for the so-called European New Right, Guillaume Faye, stated that there is a Jewish mentality, and he described the Jewish mentality as a virus, and he says that it is this virus that has led Europe into absorbing so many refugees. And this is considered to be one of the main intellectuals for the identitarian movement in Europe, for the European New Right, for the European far right, the nationalists, and they love Guillaume Faye. And I remember I confronted the Austrian leader for the identitarian movement, Martin Sellner, who's now working for Compact, the Compact magazine, and I confronted Martin Sellner on Guillaume Faye's belief on the Jews, describing the Jewish mentality as a virus and blaming the Jewish virus on the refugee crisis. And he refused to condemn Guillaume Faye. So all these, when you see this sort of talk about how we support Israel, blah, 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 and it's coming from these far right people, just remember that this is all a game. It's all a game. They will say, it's not all of them, but some of them will say that they support Israel's war against Hamas, but that's only to, for one, not look like Nazis, and secondly, to use the whole anti-Islam viewpoint as a way to foment hatred towards immigrants. So they'll say, look, those Muslims in Israel or those Muslims in Gaza are savages. Do you want these people here? And blah, 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 blah. And again, I'm not saying that Germany should bring in Muslim refugees or Muslim immigrants, but I'm just saying that they use that to foment racism. And you will see in certain statements, for example, from the AfD's regional youth branch in Baden-Württemberg, you will see, really how these people really think. When you have Götz Kubitschek saying that he refuses to say anything about the October the 7th massacre because the Jews are behind the migrant crisis, and Götz Kubitschek is well connected to the AfD, and the AfD hasn't cut off ties with Götz Kubitschek. So when I see these ultra-nationalists saying that they support Israel, I have to be suspicious of the whole thing. There is definitely hatred against Jews in the European far right, and this movement is only growing like a leviathan. People will refuse to see it because people tend not to care about the monster until the monster is right in front of them. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.